It's good to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy. Back from Tongue Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the commander in front of us on a budget on my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing it. And as we're back to do today, that deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. So I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out all those links in the description. I'd appreciate it. But today, we're going to continue rolling through Avatar content. And we're talking about a new commander, of course, and one with a new mechanic in Katara, Water Tribe's Hope. A 5-mana 3/3 human warrior ally that makes a 1/1 ally when it comes in, and then has a new ability called Waterbend. How this one works is you could pay with the X with either creatures, by tapping either creatures or artifacts. It says if creatures you control have base power and toughness XX until end of turn, X can't be 0, we can activate only during our turn. I love the idea of this ability, especially when it comes to tokens, because it means that one, you could tap your tokens to increase all their powers. Two, if you give them vigilance, you can do this in the middle of the combat. But three, this means if you have a board full of 1/1s, you could tap a couple of the 1/1s you brought in this turn, right, that can't attack, and you're going to do nothing but buff the other tokens you have, leading to more damage. I think there's really a lot of way to take advantage of this ability, and I decided to kind of spin it towards the tokens and try to take real advantage of this ability together. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos just a little bit early for just $1 a month to support the channel, I'd appreciate if you checked it out down below. If you know anything about me, you know I love my tokens, so a deck like this is right up my wheelhouse. And there's a lot of ways to approach tokens. I kind of wanted to try to find a bunch of fun ways to make them. So I reached back to March of the Machines for Invasion New Phyrexia. This is an X white blue spell. It's going to make X 2/2 night tokens. And the really nice part about this is that it's almost on rate for what you'd expect from a lot of other token generation spells. Then, if you flip the battle over by defeating it, you get to turn it into Fairy, who can either one, make an emblem to buff all of your knights and give them ward 1, or it could just help you dig through your deck, or force something to shuffle back in. I just love the idea that you could flip them over and immediately make them into 3/2s. Elspeth, of course, you're going to see in a lot of token stacks these days. It automatically doubles them any number of tokens you'd make. Her +1 can make a soldier. The 0 puts a counter on all your creatures. It gives them flying, a killer ability that can help you end a game. And then the -3 can just get rid of a creature with mana value 3 or greater. But the top two abilities are the ones that we're going to really use that Elspeth for. And of course, we love the old Elspeth, big 6-mana, 4 loyalty planeswalker. But her +3 makes 3 soldiers. Her -3 destroys all creatures with power 4 or greater, and then that big -7 is just going to give all of our creatures a buff and flying. Those are the kind of abilities that can really help us end the game, especially if your opponents don't have a ton of ways to give their creatures flying. Next, our cards you're going to see when it comes to token decks, because they do such a great job at making them. Adeline, of course, makes a 1/1 human whenever you attack, attacking each of your opponents, and Adeline's power is equal to the number of creatures you control. I love the idea of Katara being able to make those 1/1s bigger if we want to. Same thing with Anok Strike Leader. If it or your commander attacks, you make a 1/1 goblin attacking everybody. And Strike Leader adds the great ability to sacrifice itself to give all of our tokens indestructible, which is a huge deal because remember that Katara doesn't have to tap for its own ability, meaning we can use it as long as it's on the battlefield. So even if we had to recast her, right, we could still tap those tokens to use her ability. Apothecary White says whenever we attack, we make a food token for each player being attacked. And you might go, okay, well, what do food matter? Well, remember, Waterbend, you can tap artifact tokens. So that's already great to begin with. But then what Apothecary White can do is pay a white and tap any number of foods you want to make that many creature tokens. So you could still turn those foods into humans, right, into creature tokens if you want to. Otherwise, we can use those foods, right, to pay for Waterbend. And that's where part of the deck I think gets great too, is if you can make food or clues or treasures, you can use them to pay for the waterbend as well. Charismatic Conqueror gives your opponents a choice whenever an artifact or creature they control comes in untapped. They get a choice. They either tap it down or we make a 1/1 vampire. Illustrious Wanderglyph makes a gnome on everybody's turn. And then if we can get the City's Blessing out, buffs all of our other artifact creatures by +2/+2. Voice of Victory is going to stop our opponents from casting spells on our turn and has mobilized 2, so we can make a couple warriors in combat. And then it's not just creatures that make tokens. We have spells. Things like Martial Coup is a nice board wipe. So if we cast it for X's 4 or less, we're just going to make that many soldiers. But if we pay 5 or more, we're going to destroy all other creatures and that make that many soldiers. So now you can wipe the board and end up ahead because you're going to make the soldiers. United Front makes a bunch of allies and then puts a counter on each creature you control. And the same thing with White Sun's Twilight. You make a bunch of mice, you gain that much life, and if it's 5 or more, you destroy other creatures. I love the idea of playing board wipes that end up keeping you ahead because you get something out of it, whereas all your opponent's things are being destroyed. You have things like Call the Copper Codes, which can make tokens equal to the number of creatures opponents control, and you could pay 2 more for each additional opponent to get more. Grand Crescendo can give our whole board indestructible, but you also have the option to pay a little bit extra to get some tokens, which is never a bad thing. Secure the Waste, an example, probably one of the best on-rate token generation spells we have, just paying X and a white and getting that many warrior tokens. Horn of Gondor is one that can gonna need to start to snowball, but once it does, it could be very good. Comes in and makes a 1/1 human, and then for 3 mana, you make a number of humans equal to the number of humans you control. So it can definitely get out of hand quickly. But again, one of those key things where you pay it to get a bunch of the humans, you tap the humans into Katara and just grow your board immediately. Same thing with something like Horn of Valhalla. It comes in and makes some tokens, and then you could equip it to a creature, and that creature gets buffed for each creature you control. So if you have a cheap flyer or you have some flying tokens, this can really put some damage on board. Or, you could turn Katara or another regular creature into a big threat towards your opponents. Champions from Beyond comes in and makes X hero creature tokens. When you attack with 4 more creatures, you get to scry 2 and draw. And then when you attack with 8 or more creatures, each of those creatures gets +4/+4 till end of turn. So this is going to allow us to have us want to attack, right, with our tokens, but we could still make them at a great rate. Dollmaker Shop and Porcelain Gallery is probably one of my favorite token generating enchantments. So whenever one or more creatures we control attack a player that aren't toys, we get to make a toy token. And then for 6 mana, we turn all of our creatures into XXs, where X is the number of creatures we control. This is a huge ability, and one that can really just end the game very quickly if you could set it up and keep it online. I think Rabble Rousing also makes a ton of sense in this deck. Whenever you attack with one or more creatures, you make that many citizen tokens. You have the option to hide away the card that you originally got with it if you have 10 or more creatures. But for really what Rival Rising is going to do is you attack, you get the tokens. I'm going to immediately, if it's profitable for me, put the tokens right into Katara's ability, right? To tap, increase my board, and just make it very hard to deal with. Abilities like these that make you these tokens on attack, I think are the kind of abilities that are going to really change the game for a deck like this and allow it to be very difficult to deal with, because no 1/1's ever just going to be a 1/1. Right, it's going to be a 6/6, a 7/7, and then they're going to be harder and harder to block if your opponent can't wipe the board away from us. And we're backing this stuff up with protection spells, right? Free spells and things like that. But it's important to remember that this is what our deck wants to do, so we need to make sure we deliver on it. I think it's also makes sense to play around with Waterbend some more, right? We already care about it with Katara, so let's play with it some more. You have Yua, which can Waterbend 5 to play a spell from our hand for free without paying its mana cost. This is a massive deal in a deck that's just going to slam creature tokens on the battlefield. Now you don't need to pay mana to play our key, support pieces we're going to talk about. You can get them down for free and then use your mana for other things. Maybe hold it up for protection or counterplay, things like that. Spirit Water Revival says addition of cost to cast it, you can Waterbend 6. So you draw 2 automatically. But if we Waterbend, instead, we shuffle our graveyard in our library, draw 7, and have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. So this is great because it could just be a draw spell, or it's a way to continue to dig through your deck and not have to worry about drawing too many cards. Waterbender's Restoration, again, we can Waterbend X addition to casting it. We exile X target creatures we control and return those to the battlefield under their owner's control. So we do have to Waterbend X. I apologize. I apologize. It's not a May like Spirit Water Revival. But hey, this lets you blink creatures, and that's important for right Katara. It makes the 1/1 when it comes in, and there's some other creatures in our deck that do things on enters. Well, now they have that. Also think about this defensively. Defensively, this would let you tap those creatures to Waterbend and get them away from a board wipe, right? Exile them and basically phase them out until end of turn, allowing them to not have to deal with the board wipe that's coming in, protect your key creatures, and they literally get to tap for free to protect themselves, right? As long as they're untapped. So now you can start to see where you can either use this as a blink option or you can use it as a protection option. The Legend of Korok is probably the top end of what this deck could probably do if we're 100% honest. If you have the right pieces out, Avatar Kuruk says for 20 mana, you can just take an extra turn after this one on Waterbend 20. If you have enough tokens, you can happily pay for that Waterbend 20. And if you have something like Rabble Rousing or Dollmaker Shop or Adeline, these ones that are netting you tokens every turn, you can eventually get to the point where you have enough tokens that you can take infinite turns. Now, I don't expect this to happen every game, right? This is a top end scenario, but it's a top end scenario you need to be aware of that you could play into and potentially, right, have a lot of fun with. And then Waterbender Ascension, whenever one of our creatures hits a player, we put a quest counter on it. If it has 4 or more counters on it, we get to draw a card. But it adds a key ability that we can waterbend for to stop a creature from being blocked. This is huge, right? Especially if we can pair Katara with something like Horn of Valhalla to buff it, or you have something like Adeline, right, that grows for the number of tokens you have. Those are the kind of creatures that if you give them unblockable, are going to deal a ton of damage to your opponents. It could be an interesting play for this. Or you just be able to give a key creature unblockable at the right time to guarantee it hits for an ability. There's a lot of ways we could take advantage of Waterbender Ascension, but the draw at minimum is great. At maximum, right, you're giving the right things unblockable at the right time. I think any blue deck that can care about combat wants to play things like Enduring Curiosity and Biden of Thoughts to draw cards as our creatures hit players. This is a huge deal because we're going to need to get through our deck to find our key pieces. Even Wind Guides can actually give all of our creature tokens flying and vigilance, which is a huge deal. Not only can they then attack, but remember, vigilance is key because then they can tap to buff themselves with Katara. And so we do want to prioritize that vigilance when we can find it. Again, the Indomitable, same thing, drawing us cards when our creatures hit. Unstoppable Plan's kind of interesting. Lets us untap all of our non-land permanents at the beginning of our end step. My thought here is this is just going to allow us to untap our tokens so they can block. Remember, we can't use Katara's abilities during our opponent's turn, but that's okay. I think it's still worth giving them up the ability to block, especially once they get buffed a little bit through other means. And then Training Grounds, I think, just makes a ton of sense, right? Her ability is a activated ability. It does cost mana, so Training Grounds, or technically, it does cost something. So Training Grounds can reduce it by 2, and there's some few other abilities in the deck that we can reduce the Training Grounds with as well. And of course, she's pictured on it in the bonus set sheet, so that makes a ton of sense, right? But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again: no deck's ever complete. It's my first shot at Katara, and I think going into testing, there's always going to be ways to play more doublers like Mondrak. You're going to see a lot of times with token decks that people really focus on doubling and tripling their tokens, which is a great thing. Don't get me wrong, but I've always tried to focus in my token decks on making sure you have enough ways to make tokens, so that when you see the doublers always end up being a benefit. Whereas if you're focused on playing as many doublers as you can, sometimes you can miss out on that critical stash of token makers you need. But obviously, something like Mondrak is a great piece. Number one, because it doubles your tokens. But number two, because as it will is an ability to give itself indestructible, meaning hopefully it should survive itself from a board wipe. Mural's another great example of a creature that makes tokens on attack, and it stops our opponents from doing things during our turn. I just had to try to shave the budget somewhere, so I kind of shaved out some of these doublers that are more expensive. And I love Mural; it's a great card, and it actually about halved in price with that secret layer printing. But obviously gives us room to ramp up our budget. And then you have fun things like Ancient Gold Dragon, that when it hits a player, you roll a d20 and make that many 1/1 fairy dragons. Again, there's so many ways to make tokens that you can explore this how you want to. Do you want it to be spells? Do you want it to be creatures? Find the things that you like to make tokens. The other thing that I don't think I explored enough, if I'm honest, is even spells that make clues. Remember, clues are artifacts that you can tap for Waterbend. So things like, official Officious Interrogation, I think, is the spell from Karlov Manor that makes clues equal to the number of creatures your opponents control. That's a huge deal. You could think about ways to make clues whenever you attack or draw or do things. There's so many ways that you could find more ways to make tokens than just creatures. I love my token decks. I love my token focus decks. So I was like, I want to make this token creatures. I want to start, snowballing and winning the game that way. But there's definitely a way that you could push this towards artifact tokens and take advantage of it that way. There's definitely a way to mix and match, pick one or the other. The floor is endless on what you want to do with those. But let's do what we love to do on the channel the most and get into our playtests. Remember, the goal of playtests on our channel is not to find magical Christmas land. It's not just to show off all our best plays, but it's getting some gameplay scenarios and kind of test some test hands and see what we would do to set them up. So here we've got a 4-lander. You see some artifact synergies here. We do have some cards in the deck that care about them, but of course you'd want more of them, right? If you spin towards the clue angle. We see multiple ways to make tokens. We got 5 mana here, so we're just 1 off of Elspeth, and we've got enough for Katara. So this is great, right? Obviously, you'd love to see a bit more mana, which we thankfully got to see there pretty much right off the rip, right? We got to see it multiple times, but it just goes to show you that these effects can be really valuable. So there, turn 3 Biden of Thassa, we're already starting to make sure we get some good mana. Here, I think I would just go with Katara, get that ally in. Turn 6 here, I really like Elspeth. Just plus her up to make the soldiers. Remember, those soldiers don't have haste, right? But we can waterbend with Katara. Now, obviously, it's not as good for Katara because she's already a 3/3. So, tapping them to waterbend to make them a 3/3, her 3/3 isn't as good as it is making this 1/1 into a 3/3. But I think it would just depend on what my opponent's board state's in. If I think I can get these both in as 3/3s, tap them, waterbend in, and make it happen. Actually, I realized you could do 4 because Katara could tap herself for the waterbend as well. So it'd actually be 4/4. And you probably end up picking up at least one card there, right? Off the attacks from the Biden of Thassa. Now we come back to our turn. Haven't really seen any counterplay, which is something you'd want to see in an Azorius deck. But here we have some nice protection. We have some removal. Skull Clamp is a great way to start attaching to creatures to draw cards. Remember that Skull Clamp says you give the equipped creature +1/-1, and then whenever the creature dies, you draw 2 cards. So when you have a 1/1, this inevitably just leads to drawing 2 cards. So this is another great way for just a mana to bring it down, and then a mana every time you equip. Let's say we equip it to one of these soldiers, we could do that. I would much rather go ahead and tick up Elspeth, make 3 more, and then equip to 1. The only reason I say that is, and this is how I'd probably arrange them on my board, is because these can attack, these can't. So why get rid of one that could potentially attack this turn and get us some value? There we see Water Whip, a way to return things back to its opponent's hands, but we do have to water bend for it. And there's Coastal Piracy. Again, more ways to draw cards. So we're seeing a lot of them. I kind of want to start holding up mana for something like Grand Crescendo, although Champions of Beyond wouldn't be bad to get down this turn. This is 7 creatures on board, so we're probably going to end up getting pretty close to attacking with 8 creatures pretty soon, especially if we make a couple heroes this turn. So Champions of Beyond is pretty darn close. I've got 5 mana left. I say there could be a world where you put the mana into this, but we do need to keep double white up for Grand Crescendo. So I kind of rather leave the Crescendo and the swords up here just for some counterplay. And again, attack, you can tap these 2 in Katara to make them all 3/3s if you want to, because remember these need to tap to attack. So I mean, at least at minimum, you could make them all 3/3s. And again, we probably pick up at least 1, probably 2 cards here. I would guess. I think I'm willing to probably pitch the piracy. I think we got more than enough draw at this point. So we come back to our next turn. Let's say somebody tried to wipe the board and we crescendoed for 1. We could have played that. We could have played the Plowshares. We wouldn't have had the Waterbend up to play the Water Whip, but that's okay. Again, the point is we had some protection, there for our side. But now, we're 1 off of Elspeth. So I think we just do that again. Right now, we've got some nice attackers getting ready to go. If you wanted to, we could have played the Caretaker's Talent before that just to get some card draw if we didn't want to just rely on Clamp for the card draw. Remember, once per turn, on each turn, you can draw a card off the talent for that. 5 mana left. I'd probably almost just double white for the champions. My thought here is then I don't get it this turn because I'm only at 7, but I would get it the next turn. The bottom ability, but I would still at least get to scry 2 and draw. And then I would just, again, keep attacking. You can tap the 4, so they all become 4/4s. If you want to leave a couple back and tap more, if you think them being bigger is more profitable for you, then do it. I think a lot of this point of the game plan is going to come down to, would I rather have 4 5/5s, or would I rather have 3 7/7s? What makes the most sense? How can you profitably use your creatures for attacking? Figure that part out. And then, it all just comes down to where you attack, right? Playtest 2 here with a 4-lander, trying out Wan Shitong just for some draw, and then it's a great attacker for it. I just wanted to try out some new cards, in the deck. There's the Apothecary White, and then Cathar's Crusade. Cathar's Crusade is huge, right? It's one of those cards that every time your creatures are coming in, you're getting more and more value from it. Here, I think I'll just use that Virtual Loyalty to get the Knight. And then remember, Virtual Loyalty says that once we play it down, on every end step, you untap all your creatures and put a counter on them. So that's going to grow your board as well. I think I like the Aketra's Monument here, reducing all of our white creatures by 1, and then whenever we cast a creature, we get a 1/1 warrior. This is just going to help us kind of work our way up. I was going to say, my thought was the Apothecary white this turn, so if I play the Talisman, 1, 2, and 3, plus the reduction from Oketra's Monument, is enough to play the... That, is it a 1/1 with Vigilance? Okay. And now the Apothecary White, once we start attacking, will make us the food, right? Which again can also tap for Katara's ability. Now this turn, I could play Katara. It'll net me a couple warriors and an ally. I could play Kathar's Crusade. Unfortunately, Kathar's Crusade just can't get me any buff this turn, right? Because no creatures will be entering. We could draw with there. I think I'm going to go with Katara. That's going to get me a warrior. And it'll get me an ally, right? And then now, I mean, I could attack. I have a couple creatures to tap down. I could basically make these all into 3/3s if I wanted to. That could net me a couple food, right? If I attack 3 different players with these 3, I could net a couple food this turn, which arguably could be worth it because then you have more waterbending you can do in the future. And I don't know that your opponents really have... Opponents may not have enough blockers to deal. Each of them may not have a profitable block into a 3/3. But again, this is relying on, all of my opponents not having that. So in your playtest, you kind of got to pair out a little bit of the what if my opponents have X, Y, and Z, and just think about, okay, what's the mid-case scenario? I'd probably get 2 foods here, right? And then coming into this turn, this is great. This is a great draw. Same thing with the Cathar's Crusade. But I think I like Elspeth. And then it's your choice. Do you 0 just to get a counter on all of them and get flying? Or do you +1 to get 2 more soldiers, more things to waterbend? Because my thought is I could make the 2 soldiers, right? And then waterbend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and get all these attacks in as the mole is 5/5s, right? Or you 0 here, put a counter on everything, waterbend 1, 2, and 3, make them all or 4 right here because this is vigilance 2, 4/4s. Now they're all 5, they're all 4/4s, but they have the counters on them, right? So there's, but then the thing is they're all in the air, right? So there's your split. What do you do? Do you take the soldiers? Do you take the... I think I'm kind of more apt to take the flying because I think it's just going to lead to more damage. So you waterbend the 4 of these. They're all 5/5s in the air. A couple of them still have vigilance, so they're still going to be able to be black. And then now I'm even realizing that you could waterbend the ones with vigilance. I can't believe I just thought about that now. Now they're even bigger, right? Because now you can waterbend 7, right? Because the warriors have vigilance 2s, and now they're even bigger, right? Now you're starting to see, right, where those abilities can all line up and make some real value for her. I'm realizing that Wan Xing Tong might not be as good as I think it is. I guess it's just because it has vigilance. That was my thought, was so that you could tap it for the waterbend. But hey, that's why we test. That's why we see these cards in action to see, are they doing what we want them to do, or can we take them out for something else? Forlander here, there's the virtue. Love the idea of something like Monastery Mentor, right? Making those monks more counters for us to use. I was going to say turn 2, I was trying to decide if I do this or I do the Conqueror, but I think the Conqueror makes more sense. The reason is because effects like Charismatic Conqueror, Blind Obedience, Authority of the Consuls will end up doing more than you think they will, giving your opponents things in tapped, and this may end up netting us a vampire or 2 without really having to try very hard. But it's important to remember that that we want to give ourselves the opportunity. So here my thought is play the monk, play the uh, play the spell side of the virtue of loyalty to get the knight, which is going to also get another monk. Right here, we're just casting spells to get our tokens up so that next turn, right, we could Katara. And then they do have prowess, which is something we can take advantage of in the future. But again, I guess you could take the attacks if you have them, but I don't see a world where you do. We draw Avatar's Wrath here, a really great board wipe. But I think I'm just going Katara here, making the ally. And now, we can tap 2 to make them all 2/2s. Or since this has vigilance, right, there's 3. And Charismatic Conqueror has vigilance, so there's 4. So we do potentially have a nice attack here with all of these as 4/4s if we want to. Again, just to get them in and get them attacking. And that's where I think this deck needs to... If you're going to go this route, you need to kind of be a mid-range aggressive slash kind of aggressive deck. You need to get in with the tokens because I don't see a world where your opponents are going to be able to block as profitably as you as profit as you think they can. I think in a lot of boards they're not going to be able to block all these 4/4s profitably, and you're going to win the small games. Here you have a great board wipe. Here we can just really increase our benefits next turn. Like if we have nothing to do here this turn, 6 mana, going to United front for 4. You get another monk, and you get the 4 allies counter on everything. Congratulations, you have +6, +7, right? The water bending of 7 this turn with the 3 that have vigilance and those 4 allies you just made, and you're just taking a run again. So I think you can really start to see how this token game plan, right, starts to kind of manifest itself when you're focusing on it, right? And like I said, there's so many ways you can do this. It's just, to me, as a creature token lover, this makes the most sense in my head. Here you got a 3-lander Soaring Decanter to give you open the maximum hand size. There's the Horn of Gondor and the Horn of Gondor and the Coastal Piracy. So a way to draw. Again, I love the idea of these coastal piracy type effects because we need to make sure we're getting value, right? Playing the Decanter is just 2 mana here. If I don't play it, that's 4 mana. So I could have gone here into here. Here into the Decanter is just 2 mana. I could also play the Horn of Gondor and get it started. I think that actually might make more sense just to get that process started. Now this turn, this comes in untapped. Go 3 to double, or I was thinking Cosmogrand. Remember, the second spell we cast, we either get 2/1/1 soldiers or we get a counter and everything. And then my thought here was use the Soul Ring into the Arcane Signet, and I'd probably just make the soldiers, right? Just grow the board a little bit. And now, right, our Gondor next turn or something we do on a future turn gets even better. 4, 5, 6, 7 mana this turn. Decanter would put us down to 4, but could still cast Katara if we want to do that. We could also just do the Piracy. The important thing there is that's 2 spells to trigger the Cosmogrand, right? If we want to do that. We could do the Piracy plus tap the Gondor if we want to do that. There's a lot of options there. I kind of like the idea of double spelling only because then we trigger the Cosmogrand, and I think I'd probably just make 2 tokens again. I kind of like the idea of still growing the board and giving this Gondor a better option, and it's only turn 4. So now this turn, I like the idea of getting Katara down. 3 mana left, more than enough to make the Gondor happen. So now the Gondor is going. Sorry, we make the ally. The Gondor is going off for 5, 6, 7. Pretty dang good, right? Especially since Cosmogrand's a human. Now you can, Waterbend for 8, right? All of these are now attacking. Sorry, 1, 7, 8, 9, right? You could Waterbend for 9, get these all in, probably end up drawing a couple cards, dealing some massive damage unless your opponents are going to chump it all away, right? And then now we're just cooking with gas. We've got the mana, we've got the creatures to Waterbend. Ideally, all we need would be something like Aven Wind Guide, right? To now get them all in the air. And then now you Gondor again, making a massive amount of soldiers. Now they're huge and in the air. And of course, if nobody has any way to deal with this, this is just game, right? But the nice thing about the Wind Guide is that it gets them all, vigilance in the air. You could still do this on the ground right now. I mean, you could, attack and leave a couple back and do it that way. But you can kind of start to see where this Waterbend becomes hopefully easy to do as you pair it with other effects. I'd love to know, what do you think of Katara down in the comment section below? I think the deck's pretty cool. I love the idea of Azorius tokens. There just aren't a ton of commanders that do this. I think what the deck's really going to come down to is finding your ways to pay off your waterbending. Again, whether it's finding more artifact tokens to make or just doing what we do here. You can add better support enchantments. We are seeing things like Intangible Virtue to give them vigilance, but you could find things that give your creatures flying. You could find other things, right? There's more you can add to this to make the deck harder to deal with. But I'd love to know what you think of Katara down in the comment section below, and I will catch y'all next.